Same as last year, we're going to walk you through some of the main slides from that report. Like Ron said, feel free to ask questions. Otherwise, I'll have a little monologue here and give you the most important insights. This is the first chart. Some of you might have seen that one already. Some might not have. There's a lot of text, or there's some text about each of those charts in the reports. You can download them for free. But I'm going to give you my most important, or our most important insights about that chart. First of all, this is the amount of funding that went into Asia-Pacific sports tech over the last 5 years. These are the green bars, and you also see that blue grayish line. This is the number of funding rounds for each of those years. And what you can immediately tell, of course, is that 2020 was not a good year for Asia-Pacific sports tech when it comes to the total amount of funding. So we had some huge years in 2016, 2018, where we have seen some mega deals in those years. And we were expecting, as we say, this yo-yo effect, so of going up and down, up and down. We had that in North America as well, by the way. So that seemed to be a pattern for Asia-Pacific and North American sports tech. But in 2020, of course, due to the pandemic, that has not happened, unfortunately. So actually, the year was the second lowest over the 5-year period. And just one thing to let you know, the bar for 2020, it has 2 layers. The 637 million US dollar that you see there is the deals that we have seen. But based on our experience, you can add a little reporting lag of 15%. That's what we typically go with, because some of the deals only get published a bit later. So, but still with that 15% reporting lag, 2020 was the second weakest year over the last 5 years. Like I said, of course, due to the pandemic. Also, deal-wise, we only saw 50 deals. That was the least amount of deals in Asia-Pacific sports tech, even less than in the weakest year over the last couple of years, which was 2017. The interesting thing, though, was that the average deal size was slightly higher than the years before, and that was a big deal size. The average deal size is 18.7 million US dollar. So we like to think or say that the investors got more cautious, they were more selective, but if they invest, they still invest bigger amounts. So 18.7 million is quite an average ticket size. And the median ticket size actually was consistent with around 1 million US dollar, which was basically the same like in the last 2 years. What else is interesting, that 2020 or the start of 2020 actually creates a lot of hope, or indicates that the ecosystem is recovering from that struggling year. And already in the first quarter, we have seen mega deals of Dream 11, of Keep, of the Mobile Premier League, and only the first quarter of 2021 already exceeded the total amount of last year in Asia-Pacific sports tech. So it seems a bit like investors were cautious last year, were taking things a bit slowly, but this year they started with the bang, and we can already tell this is going to be at least the third best year if you look at this 5-year comparison. That is it from our side on this chart. This is always the entry chart. Let's go on to the next one. We don't only look on the region itself, but we also look at the countries and regions that are below. And on the left side, you see the top countries by funding over the last 5 years. And on the right side, you see the top countries and regions by funding just in 2020. And a few things are obvious or interesting to highlight, just a few from them. If you look on the left side over the last 5 years, we clearly see how important and how big China is as a market. I mean, with 4.5 billion US dollar, that is 4.5 times the amount that India secured over that period. And if we then look at country number 3, which is Japan, this is below 100 million euros. So there's a huge gap between the two driving forces, which are China and India, with India being the leading one, at least over the last 5 years. One more thing to add, I think Ron mentioned it before, it's the first time that we added Australia and New Zealand to the Asia-Pacific SportsTech report. That's why it was renamed. And Australia actually is an important country, to no surprise, in SportsTech, ranking on number 4 when it comes to the funding of countries. And a lot of countries, as you can see, are below the 10 million US dollar funding mark. So there is still some room for development in that region. But the interesting thing is that when we look at the funding in 2020, we see that the dominance of China is actually not there anymore. In fact, India had a really strong year with 455 million US dollar. And China is only on number 2 with like a third of that amount. So there might be some early indicators that the power is shifting from China to India. Of course, that is just 1 year, so we have to see if the trend is going to develop. But it's, like I said, a first indicator that something can actually happen there. Another interesting thing that I want to highlight is that Australia is actually also the country that has the most amount of startups in Asia Pacific. So it's not India, it's not China, and actually Australia lands at position number 3 globally. So Australia, big sports tech country, lots of companies, funding wise, still, let's say, room for improvement there. But overall, we can say India, China, and Australia, these are the top 3 that we focus on here. All right, poll time. We are gonna talk about cities in the next chart. I would like to ask you a question. This is why I'm sending you a poll. This must have popped up now in the poll section. So we are curious, now that you also have seen the numbers from the previous slide, what do you think, which city in Asia Pacific actually received the most sports tech funding in 2020? So I would like to ask you to go there, submit your vote, and then we see what the outcome is. I'll give you a little bit of time to do so. Go to the poll section. There I would need your answers. Please submit your votes. All right, they're trickling in. All right, now the majority has voted. And as you can see, you say Bangalore on number 1 more than Mumbai, and you are ranking Tokyo on number 3, and you don't believe that much funding went into the Chinese cities. Interesting, because China has received the most amount of funding, right? Let's see if you're right. Almost. Your top 2 is actually correct. So if you look on the right side again, cities by funding in 2020 in Asia Pacific Sports Tech, you see that indeed the 2 Indian cities, Mumbai and Bangalore, are leading the race. It's a bit flipped compared to what you have guessed. But yeah, India was big in 2020. And if you look at the amount of funding on the right side, Mumbai over 200, Bangalore over 200 billion US dollar, and both Beijing and Chengdu, if we combine both, they don't even reach 200 million US dollar together. So big year for sports tech in India. If we look on the left side, however, over the last 5 years, that looks a bit different. I mean, if you just look at the flags, you see Chinese flags, which you see Indian flags, and there's one Japanese flag there with Tokyo. So on position number 8, Tokyo managed to be the only non-Chinese, non-Indian city on in the top 10 over the last 5 years. But this is very much dominated by China, as you can see. Yeah, big deals, especially in 2016. So we expect that to change in next year's report, actually. What else is there to say? I mean, on the left side, not so many flags. On the right side, it looks a little bit better actually. So there we also have, for example, Sydney in the top 10. We have Taichung in the top 10. We have Jeddah in the top 10. So there it's a little bit more diverse. What else to add there? Bangalore has actually seen the most amount of deals, and if we look at number 2, then we see that Tokyo has the second most amount of deals in sports tech over that period. So Tokyo seems to be an upcoming little sports tech hub. Let's see if they can also turn that into actual funding numbers. What we're missing here on the left side in the top 10 is Australia. Just letting you know that on position number 11, there's Melbourne. On position number 12, there's Sydney. So the Australian cities just missed that top 10 list by a little bit. Another thing that we have not looked at yet on the right side, if you look at the share of top deals, then you can see a lot of 100% numbers there, which means that this city or the ranking in that year is actually based on just one big deal in that city. And also again showing that Bangalore is a very interesting city, but because in Bangalore it seems to be a bit more diverse, so more companies actually contributing to the big funding numbers there. And also Mumbai, 99% of the funding coming from one startup. So the volatility is typically high in those yearly lists. But yeah, enough about cities. Let's move on and come to a completely different area. Now we're not looking at geographies so much anymore, so no countries, no cities. We're still looking at Asia Pacific though, and some of you might know our sports tech framework, and in that sports tech framework we have clustered the sports tech industry to be able to speak about it with one common language, so to speak. And we have on the first level we have 3 sectors. And those sectors you see on the left side. We say, hey, there are solutions for athletes. That's the one in purple. So everybody who's doing sport and solutions for those people would land in the for athletes tab. Then we have the section for fans, so for the consumer of sports. And then we have a third one, which is very small in Asia Pacific over the last 5 years, for executives. So the solutions that someone who manages a club or a gym or a stadium or something could use, which is mainly B2B. And if we just look at the circle on the left side, we see how dominant funding for fans is in Asia Pacific, with 78.7% of the funding going towards solutions that are for the consumer of sports. There's 20% that goes into solutions for athletes. That's also a big one. But yeah, almost non-existing is funding into the B2B space, so to speak, with 1.1%. So this is clearly a end consumer market and not a B2B market when it comes to sports tech. Coming to the right side, now we go one level deeper in our framework. You still have the 3 colors. We still have the sectors for athletes, for fans, for executives. Now on the second level, we have another breakdown. As you can see, each of those sectors is either broken down into 3 or 2 subsectors. First of all, overall, the content platforms, that's part of the for fans sector, received the most amount of investment over the last 5 years, with 69% of the total investment amount. That's the biggest market, but that will likely change next year, because one of the biggest deals, the now defunct Lay Sports in 2016, will then not be in the 5-year look back anymore. But let's look into those subsectors one by one. And what you will see is that in each subsector there is one dominant one, and the others sharing the rest. When we look at the for athlete subsector, we will see that for activity software, So if you're working out and maybe, I don't know, you have an app that tracks your performance or something for your watch or whatever, is the dominant one with 3/4 of the total investment there. If you look at for fans, I said it before, the content platform, so that something that lets you as a consumer consume your sport, is the dominant one. And if you look at the for executive sector, then it's with 99.7% solutions for media and sponsor management, which makes sense because if there is a lot of content to be consumed, that content also has to be created and to be distributed. That is it about the view on the sectors and the subsectors. And we have another poll. We are gonna look at the most funded companies in last year and the most funded companies over the last 5 years on the next chart. And I would like to ask you the following. I would like to ask you how many companies with solutions that are made for executives are amongst the top 10 funded ones in 2020. So again, we're looking at top companies, so the most funded ones. And I've talked about the 3 sectors that we have for fans, for athletes, and for executives. How many do you think in the top 10 are from or for executives? We'll give you a little bit of time here. All right, close to the majority now. We'll give you a few more seconds. All right, 28 votes. You believe that none of the top 10 funded companies from 2020 are for executives. Let's see if you are right. And that is correct. Good job there, guys. So if we look at the right side, this is the top funded companies in 2020. On the left side, it's top funded companies all time. And what we have done for this year, and you see that with the different colors there, we have marked to which sector those companies belong to. So purple is for athletes, blue is for fans, and green is for executives. And if you look at this chart, and you don't even need to look at the single companies, you will quickly see that there is no green. Yeah, so solutions for executives just don't get much funding in Asia Pacific. But what else is interesting? Let's start on the left side with the all-time funding. So a bunch of big guys there, names that many of you probably know. What is interesting though is that there is some movement going on there. So if you just look at the top 3, List Sports is defunct, so they won't raise any money anymore. Do you and Huya have merged and are publicly traded. So also there we don't expect any funding rounds anymore. So we see, for example, Dream 11 or Mobile Premier League and Keep, who have all already raised big rounds this year, moving up those ranks and ultimately potentially also taking over those top spots. The only thing I think can keep them from it is if they are so successful that they would right away go for an IPO, and that they would also stop raising rounds. And the overall topic, if you look at the companies that I just mentioned, it's clearly fantasy sports and fitness. This is where the money goes to. I mean, PureFit, Dream 11, Keep, Mobile Premier League, all companies in the fitness and fantasy sports sector. And now if we switch to the right side, that pattern is basically getting even more extreme, because 7 out of the top 8 companies there are either in fitness or in fantasy sports. Look at the first 8, and yeah, the only one that is actually not there is on number 6, Play Up Sports Betting. But if you say sports betting and fantasy sports are very close, then it's basically also in that ballpark. What else is interesting if we look at that top 10 from 2020? is that Sydney and Tokyo are the only non-Indian Chinese cities popping up on that list. For example, on position number 6, it's Play Up from Sydney, and on position number 9, it's Bongs from Tokyo. And Bangalore keeps up that trend that it's a very, very important hub, because it has an unbelievable 4 companies in the top 10 of 2020, again showing how diverse that scene is. This was a super quick run through the main charts of this chapter. I see some questions and chat topics coming in. One thing to add, not much data here, but more just as an information. What we also like to do for every region is we like to give an overview of the ecosystem. And for us, an ecosystem consists of 3 main parts, as you can see here. You have your investors, who are obviously important because they contribute with capital. You have your programs that are typically accelerator and incubator programs, helping startups to succeed and to grow. And you have some other form of innovation initiatives that also deal with startups, with innovation topics, with tech. And as you can see, you probably have to compare that to the other regions, but you can see that this is a small ecosystem yet. So we don't have too many investors, programs, initiatives yet. We believe there is lots of room to grow, especially if you make yourself aware of the fact that Asia Pacific is the 2nd biggest ecosystem in sports tech when it comes to funding. So there is room for improvement, room to grow, and there's some great companies there.